This is an online lecture from the MPH programme at the University of Hertfordshire. This is the second of our public health research series entitled Research Ethics, the Declaration of Helsinki, and Good Clinical Practice. Today's session is going to explore the relationship that society has with research. It's going to look at why scientists do their research and the counterbalancing research ethics framework that constrains what they can do. We have 4 learning objectives after this session. The first is that you understand the societal and personal drivers, both positive and negative, of research. We understand the need for research ethics in the historical and current context. We're going to summarise the overarching principles and processes of research ethics, and we're going to discuss the sometimes conflicting needs of enabling high-quality research while protecting the interests of participants and society at large. No one would dispute the enormous power that medical research has for good in this world. Medicine continues to progress at a phenomenal rate, and the rewards for success are huge. Yet research is inherently risky. Patients who are exposed to new and innovative therapies may stand to benefit, but they also stand to come to harm. The 20th century saw some of the most flagrant breaches of patients' rights in the history of medicine. Included among these were the work of Dr. Josef Mengele, a Nazi physician who worked in Auschwitz, one of the concentration camps, in the 1940s. Yet the abuse of human rights is not limited to fascist regimes. One of the most important experiments that took place, which has shaped our research ethics framework over the last 20 to 30 years, was the work of the American Public Health Service in Tuskegee, Alabama. In one of the Tuskegee experiments, more than 400 impoverished African-American sharecroppers who were known to have syphilis were observed for up to 40 years by medical researchers to ascertain what the natural course of syphilis was. This was despite the widespread acceptance that penicillin was a suitable treatment, and this was something that they weren't offered. In today's scientific world, scientific curiosity has not abated, but there are new drivers which can push researchers to do things which are ethically dubious, if not downright wrong. The huge profits that can be achieved by taking successful drugs to market are one factor which can influence researchers to publish work where there may be limited or no effect. Increasingly, universities are applying stringent criteria to reward researchers based on their output. They have to publish more, and they have to publish more in higher impact journals. This is something also which can contribute and drive people towards research fraud. Ultimately, scientists are human. Clinical research involves huge quantities of money. Some estimates suggest that a single drug taken to market might cost as much as $400 million to take to the sales stage at least. Take into account all the other drugs that don't get to market, and some estimate that a single drug taken to market by a large multinational company might cost as much as $5 billion US. It can take years for a drug company to receive marketing authorization for a new compound. There are several stages to the research process. Preclinical trials can take years before they get to human safety, at which point tens of patients may be involved in assessing whether a drug is tolerated. The next stage is the expanded safety stage, and this can take hundreds of patients and often last several months. The final stage is stage 3, efficacy and safety. This takes years and involves thousands of patients. It's only at this point that a drug can be successfully marketed. The investment is huge, and therefore we need a system that protects patients from the conflicting interests of drug developers and pharmaceutical companies. So who decides what's ethical and what's not? This is what we're going to be covering in today's session. The Declaration of Helsinki was agreed for the first time in 1964 and has been amended subsequently on 7 occasions, the last of which was in October 2013 by the World Medical Association. In Article 3 of the Declaration, it says, "The Declaration of Geneva of the WMA, the World Medical Association, binds the physician with the words, 'The health of my patient will be my first consideration,' and the International Code of Medical Ethics declares that a physician shall act in the patient's best interest when providing medical care." This may seem self-evident and is very straightforward in the basic doctor-patient relationship, But where is that relationship in the context of medical research? This is where the Declaration of Helsinki comes in. The Declaration establishes the principles of medical research and covers the full scientific process from concept through to dissemination for any research involving human subjects. While technically the Declaration of Helsinki applies only to physicians, the idea is that the principles of the Declaration apply to anyone who's involved with the undertaking of medical research worldwide. The Declaration is wide-ranging and covers everything from risks, burdens and benefits through to vulnerable groups, the scientific requirements and research protocols, the role of the Research Ethics Committee. It talks about informed consent and also indicates what's necessary to disseminate the results. In the United Kingdom at least, among the consequences of the Declaration of Helsinki is the use of the Good Clinical Practice or GCP training, which is necessary for any individual involved in clinical research. For those acting in commercial organisations, GCP is recommended every year, and for the rest of us, we take it every 2 years. The course can be completed online or can, on some occasions, take several days, but covers the ethical framework for research governance and provides us updates on how we can conduct research to the highest ethical standards. The other very tangible manifestation of the Declaration of Helsinki in the United Kingdom is the Research Ethics Committee. These are operated by the Health Research Authority and the National Research Ethics Service through the Integrated Research Application System, IRAS. While frequently a source of frustration and annoyance for many researchers, the Research Ethics Committee is a board of individuals who are familiar with research, as well as a third of the 18 members who are lay members, who will go through your research application to evaluate what the ethical considerations might be and how you can best address those and ensure that your research is ethical. A frequent complaint by researchers has been the length of time that it takes to get ethical approval. It's quite a long form, and while the response times have improved fairly dramatically over the last few years, the response time is still 40 to 60 days to get approval. And so if you are trying to do research very quickly, this can hamper your efforts. And of course, it's much longer than 40 or 60 days if they come back to you and say you need to address this, because you will have to go for a further review and wait for the next sitting of that Research Ethics Committee. There is now a system called proportionate review for research ethics committees, and this is where they look at your research application, and if it is clear that there are going to be very few research ethics issues, then they can take a proportionate approach and fast-track your application. Research applications that involve dealing with vulnerable patients are particularly problematic for ethics approvals. This involves adults who lack capacity and children. And so certainly if you are applying for ethics approval in these areas, you need to give a considerable length of time for this to be considered and for you to go backwards and forwards and make sure that your research is going to be approved. So finally, here is a slide that shows the organisations that fund research in the United Kingdom and further afield. You can see that we have the public sector, which provides a fairly substantial proportion of research funding internationally. It's increasingly being caught up by the third sector, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust. And of course, there is also the private sector, which puts in vast quantities of money, particularly into drugs and medical devices research. To get a scale of the quantities of money involved, the National Institutes of Health in the United States turn over a budget of approximately $30 billion. In the UK, the National Institute for Health Research is a relatively new institution that deals with the Department of Health's spending on research, and they spend in excess of $1 billion in sterling. The Medical Research Council spends about $800 million, and that's administered through the Department of Business Innovation and Skills. These organisations fund people, they may fund projects, or they may fund themes or even institutions. The role of the funder is an incredibly important part of the research process, and so it's really important that when you come to evaluate research, that you look at who has funded it and whether there may be conflicts of interest or other motivating factors that drive the research forward. So there you have it, an introduction to the ethical aspects of medical research. In the exercise, we're going to be looking at the Tuskegee experiments based in Alabama during the 1930s, and we're also going to have a look at the Declaration of Helsinki itself.